I remember the day the sky broke. It wasn't sudden, not like the fables they tell of orbital bombardments or righteous storms sent by the Emperor. No, our sky rotted. It began as a bruise at the horizon, a swelling darkness that shimmered with strange greens and purples. The smog of our manufactorum hive was thick as always, churning with the exhaust of furnaces that had burned unceasing for centuries. But this darkness was different. It moved, it breathed, it stared back. We'd been stationed on this world for 6 months, long enough for the stink of promethium to seep into our uniforms, long enough to stop dreaming of home. The locals called it Sanctis Theta, though there was nothing sanctified about it. A half-dead industrial moon orbiting a larger corpse of a planet, its surface etched with slag pits, refinery towers, and the skeletal remains of manufactorums long abandoned. I was part of the 92nd Tranche Penal Cohort, meaning we were the expendables the Munitorum kept in numbered cages until they needed bodies to plug a hole. When the warning klaxon started, most of us didn't even flinch. We'd heard them before: chemical leaks, reactor breaches, labor riots. The air always screamed for one reason or another. But then the vox lines went dead. The overseer's voice, usually a chain of curses and half-muttered prayers, cut off mid-syllable. What replaced it was silence so deep it felt like it was pressing against the inside of my skull. Then came the first sound, a vibration, low and trembling, like the hum of a cathedral organ played beneath the earth. The air quivered. The very ground beneath my boots seemed to pulse. Some said it was the planet's crust shifting. Others said it was the voice of the Emperor, warning us. I knew better. The Emperor's voice did not make men vomit blood. We looked up, and the clouds tore open. What poured through them was not rain. It was life, if you could call it that. Black, seething spores, the size of fists, falling in thick curtains. Each one pulsed with its own dim light, a heartbeat of corruption. They hissed as they struck the ground, eating through metal and stone, burrowing into the flesh of anything unlucky enough to be caught beneath them. We could smell them before we could see them properly. A wet, sweet stench of decay, mixed with something sharp and acidic, like fruit left to rot inside a machine. Someone screamed. I think it was Lieutenant Grain, though by then his voice was already fading beneath the roar of the descending storm. Our voxcasters spat static. No orders, no prayers, just the endless hiss of interference that sounded disturbingly like whispering. I clutched my lasgun and started to pray aloud, though I couldn't remember the words properly. My training sergeant used to say that faith was a weapon sharper than any bayonet. That day, I learned that faith was also a mask to hide behind while the universe devoured you. We were supposed to form firing lines. That was the doctrine. But our officers were gone, melted, crushed, dissolved before the order ever came. A sergeant with half his face burned away shouted something about defensive positions, then collapsed as one of the spore pods struck him squarely in the chest. His body smoked, folded inward, and was gone. All around us, the manufactorum grounds shuddered. The gantries swayed, cables snapping and whipping through the air like the lashes of an angry god. I remember the taste of metal in my mouth, the grit of ash on my teeth. The air grew heavy alive. It hummed, as though a swarm of unseen insects vibrated within every breath I took. And then the sky screamed. There's no other word for it. It was not thunder. It was not wind. It was the sound of something vast and hungry, expressing joy. The clouds writhed, peeled back, and through them descended the first of the beasts. I'd seen picked captures before, blurred images from other worlds. Stories passed between regiments about the devourers, the great swarm, the hive beyond stars. But picts are mercy. They flatten horror into something the mind can manage. The real thing, the living storm, defied sense. It was as if the sky itself had turned to flesh, writhing with a billion wriggling forms. Great, winged shapes drifted through the smog, their bellies split with glowing sacs that pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the storm. Below them, smaller shapes, if smaller, can describe something larger than a chimera, hurtled downward in streaks of fire. Each impact shook the manufactorum like artillery. The ground split, vents ruptured, Slag pits boiled, and from the craters crawled them the Tyranids. The first I saw clearly was a nightmare of limbs and carapace, glistening with slime that smoked as it hit the ground. Its body was all motion too fast, too deliberate. Its mouth opened in a scream that had no sound, only vibration, as though the air itself refused to carry its voice. It lunged, and the men nearest it died before they even understood what they were seeing. I remember the way their bodies folded, torn apart with surgical precision. I remember the way the creature paused to taste the blood in the air. I fired. Emperor, help me. I fired until my lasgun's charge pack hissed with heat. The shots burned bright holes in its hide, but it didn't stop. It twitched, as though irritated, and then surged forward again. Someone beside me, maybe Torvik, maybe someone else, threw a frag grenade. It exploded in a cloud of light and meat, and for one brief, glorious moment, we thought we'd killed it. Then something larger landed behind it. The earth itself groaned, plates of steel and concrete buckling under its weight. The thing that emerged was not just a creature, it was an ecosystem. I saw tendrils, mouths, wings, and claws, all moving with one purpose. It vomited smaller creatures from openings that should not have existed, each one already armed with scything limbs and chitinous rifles that pulsed as if alive. When they fired, the air turned white with heat. I dove behind a rusted hauler and felt the beam pass where my head had been. The metal melted like wax. I remember thinking, the Emperor has abandoned us. That thought was heresy. I knew it even then. But in that moment, surrounded by screams and burning air, I could not lie to myself. The Emperor was light, but the light had been eaten. All that remained was hunger. The penal troops broke. Men ran in every direction into the smog, into the spore fields, into the arms of death. Some tried to climb the manufactorum towers, though the cables snapped beneath their weight and sent them tumbling into the feeding pits below. Others dropped to their knees and prayed until something silenced them. A few of us stayed, not because we were brave, but because there was nowhere left to go. I remember clutching my lasgun until the edges of the grip cut into my palms. Blood slicked the metal. The smell of it mingled with the acid tang in the air. My hands shook, but I aimed again, and again, and again, each shot a prayer, each recoil a confession. I shouted the litany of accuracy until my voice broke. By the will of the throne, may this beam strike true, may this sin be purged. But the words meant nothing. The light struck chitin, and the chitin endured. Beside me, Trooper Varin tore off his rebreather and vomited blood. "They're in the air," he croaked. "The spores, they're alive." I watched as the veins in his neck pulsed black, as something beneath his skin began to move. He clawed at his throat until he stopped moving entirely. When he fell, his body burst like rotten fruit, releasing a cloud of shimmering dust that drifted toward me. I ran. I don't remember deciding to, but my body moved on its own, driven by an animal terror that no discipline could restrain. I stumbled through corridors of rust and steam, past burning vats, past the corpses of men who had served and died without name or glory. I could hear the creatures behind me, not their footsteps, but the wet, rhythmic clicking of their limbs, the skittering song of hunger. The manufactorum sirens still wailed, their pitch warping as power fluctuated. Somewhere in the distance, the reactors were overloading. I remember the flicker of emergency lumen strips, each flash revealing another nightmare. Men cocooned in translucent slime, still twitching. Walls that breathed, pipes that pulsed like veins. When I finally collapsed in the shadow of a ruined bulkhead, I looked up once more. The sky was no longer a sky, it was a mouth. The clouds churned as the spore rain thickened, a living ocean of descent. I could see shapes within it, vast silhouettes like insects with cities growing from their backs. They were not ships in any sense I knew. They were alive, and they were feeding. My vox crackled then, faint but unmistakable. A voice, a priest's perhaps, though it was hard to tell through the static, was chanting, not orders, not coordinates, prayers. The words rose and fell with the rhythm of the storm. The flesh is weak. The soul is eternal. The Emperor devours the devourer. The Emperor devours the devourer. I tried to join in, but my throat was raw, my lungs full of ash. I mouthed the words anyway, because silence felt like surrender. Above me, the screaming continued, echoing through metal and bone alike. I realized then what the sound truly was: not rage, not triumph, but hunger given voice. The planet itself seemed to echo it, as though it longed to be consumed, to end its centuries of labor and decay in one final feast. When the next impact struck nearby, the shockwave threw me to the ground. The world went white for a moment, and when I blinked the light away, I saw the creature that had landed. It was smaller than the others, more compact, more deliberate. It turned its eyeless face toward me, tasting the air with tendrils that glistened like wet glass. I raised my lasgun. My charge pack was empty. The creature cocked its head, as if curious. Then it lunged. The next thing I knew, I was beneath it, pinned against the cracked ferrocrete, its breath hot and fetid against my face. Its mouth opened a pit of glistening teeth and churning flesh, and for a heartbeat, I saw something reflected in it. Myself, tiny and trembling, a mote of dust before a storm. And then, impossibly, it stopped. Its head twitched. It turned away, as though something greater had called it elsewhere. With a sound like tearing silk, it was gone. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sky scream. When at last I stood, the manufactorum was unrecognizable. Where once there had been towers and gantries, there were only mounds of steaming biomass. The air shimmered with spores. The horizon itself seemed to crawl, the distant landscape moving in slow, heaving waves of flesh. The invasion had begun. The world was already lost, and I was still alive. I sometimes wish I had died there, beneath that first fallen beast. It would have been a clean death, quick, certain. Instead, I was left to witness what came after, to breathe the same air as the devourers, to feel their song in my bones, to understand that survival was not victory, it was punishment. The sky screamed for 3 days without pause. It has been 3 days since the sky began to scream. Or perhaps it has been 3 years. Time dissolves in war, especially when the air itself eats away at the hours. I woke among corpses. The manufactorum that once stretched like a metal forest was now a swamp of rot. The ground pulsed beneath my boots, soft and warm, as though something immense slept just below the surface. The air shimmered with heat and spore light, every breath a choking mix of oil, smoke, and the sweet stench of alien decay. The dead lay in heaps: guardsmen, servitors, conscripts, even officers reduced to pink mush beneath their gilded carapace armor. Every wound hissed, bubbling with a corruption that moved of its own accord. We had been ordered by whom, I do not know, to hold the line. The Vox repeated it endlessly, a recording perhaps, or the last delusional command of a dead officer. Hold the line. But there was no line anymore. Only the digestion pits, and the things that slithered between them. We fought anyway. Because fighting was easier than thinking. I remember the first hour of that second day. The sound of lasguns crackling in the fog, like insects frying on power lines. My rifle was caked with filth, its casing eaten by acid rain, but it still spat light when I pulled the trigger. I had scavenged a new charge pack from a corpse whose name I never knew. He had died smiling, at least it looked like a smile, though it might have been rigor mortis pulling his lips back to show the blackened teeth beneath. The ground was slick with ichor. The puddles reflected the color of infection greens, yellows, and bruised violets. We could not tell which fluids were ours anymore. Each splash burned when it touched exposed skin, and the medics, those who hadn't already been turned into feeding stock, warned us to keep the wounds covered. We ran out of bandages before noon. After that, we wrapped our arms in strips torn from the dead. The Tyranids never stopped coming. They did not charge in waves like orcs, nor advance in disciplined ranks like the Astartes we had once seen in propaganda reels. They flowed, they poured, they bred from the ground itself, each corpse feeding another, each explosion of gore birthing something new. We would kill one only for 3 more to crawl from its carcass, gnawing on its bones as they took shape. The air itself was thick with movement, tiny spore creatures that clung to faces, eyes, and mouths, burrowing into the softest flesh. Every time I blinked, I saw new horrors forming from the mist. We fired until our barrels glowed red. The heat shimmered up from the muzzles like ghostlight, warping the air. The recoil numbed my arms, the smell of last discharge blending with the stench of acid and meat. When I tried to speak, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I had forgotten the taste of clean air. My rebreather had long since cracked, and every inhale was a gamble between suffocation and infection. I do not remember who screamed first. Perhaps it was me. The Tyranid line had shifted again, if it could be called a line, spilling over the trenches we had dug from broken conveyor belts and shattered hab walls. The ground itself trembled as something vast moved beneath it, tunneling. We fired downward, like fools, as if last fire could wound the earth. Then the tunnel burst open and swallowed half the squad in a fountain of black mucus and bones. I saw Trooper Jalen disappear in a single gulp. His scream cut short as he vanished, leaving only his helmet behind. It rolled to my feet, dented and wet, the Vox still active. From it came a static hiss that almost sounded like whispering prayers. I should have run, but I couldn't. None of us could. The Commissar's orders spoken days before still clung to us like iron chains. You will not yield. You will not break. The Emperor is your shield. Your body is his wall. We had internalized those words like catechism, like infection. To flee felt worse than dying, so we held the line that did not exist. Every lasbolt we fired bought another second of meaningless survival. When the power cells finally drained, we fought with bayonets, with shovels, with our fists. The Tyranids didn't bleed red. Their ichor was a thick, luminous green that hissed and smoked on contact. When it touched the skin, it seared through flesh and bone alike, but we learned to use it. We scooped it up with broken helmets, flinging it into their faces like holy water. And for a few heartbeats it worked. Their carapaces blistered, their limbs shriveled. Then the next tide came. We fell back again and again through the ruins of hab blocks that had once held families, now reduced to tombs. The walls were blackened, the floors slick with digestive fluid. I tripped over a child's doll half melted into the ferrocrete, its glass eyes staring at me through the muck. I stepped on it deliberately, just to make it stop looking. The smell was unbearable. Not just of death, but of transformation. Imagine every wound on a planet festering at once, every vein pumping corruption instead of blood. The air was syrup thick, heavy with organic vapor. I could taste it, clinging to my teeth like fat. I learned that you could tell where the swarm was by scent alone. The sweet, chemical reek of their breath carried far in advance of their arrival. We stumbled into a basin of shattered reactors, a field of twisted pipes and half-melted slag. The ground steamed beneath our boots, each step releasing a hiss like boiling water. Corporal Wren said it was safer there, that the radiation would keep them at bay. I wanted to believe him. We dug in among the debris, stacked corpses as barricades, and waited for the inevitable. Night fell, though it was hard to tell where the sun had gone. The sky glowed a dull green from the constant rain of spores, painting everything in sickness light. We could see them moving through the haze silhouettes that glided more than ran, their carapaces glinting with that unnatural sheen. They never seemed to tire. They moved with purpose, as though guided by an unseen will. I remember seeing one stop just meters from our barricade. It crouched there, sniffing the air or whatever passed for breathing in that thing. Its skull was long and ridged, its eyes no more than black pits. It tilted its head as if listening. Then it screamed, and the sound tore through the night like metal shearing apart. They came from every direction. Our guns roared, the flashes blinding in the dark. Flesh and chitin exploded into showers of acid, spraying our faces. I felt something hot hit my cheek. When I wiped it away, skin came off with it. The pain was so sharp it became clarity. I saw everything in that moment, the shapes, the motion, the way their claws scythed through the air like pendulums. Men died around me faster than I could count. Some went down silently, others screaming praises or curses. The worst were those who didn't scream at all, just stared in shock as something impaled them, their eyes wide with disbelief that their bodies could end so suddenly. I envied them, and still we fought. At some point, I realized I was laughing. Not from joy, but from the sheer absurdity of it. The sound startled even me, a dry, broken chuckle bubbling through cracked lips. The man next to me, face blackened with soot, turned and grinned. He raised his lasgun to his temple, whispered something about joining the Emperor's table, and pulled the trigger. I watched his body slump into the mud, still smiling, and I envied him. When dawn came, if dawn it was, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The sun was a dull smear behind the haze, turning the air a rancid yellow-green. Our weapons were useless, our voices hoarse from screaming, our faith worn to rags. The commissar was gone, the officers eaten or worse. What remained of our regiment crouched amid mountains of the dead. The corpses formed a wall, a grotesque rampart that steamed and quivered as the Tyranid fluids seeped through them. We held that wall like it was holy. Somewhere in the distance, the vox crackled again. A new voice, this time distorted, mechanical. "Reinforcements inbound," it said. "Hold position, Emperor protects." It repeated the message 3 times, then fell silent. We looked to the sky, but there was nothing there. No dropships, no thunderhawks, only the same living storm, the same falling spores, the same sound of something vast feeding. Rain started to cry. I didn't even know he could cry. He had always been the hard one, the one who told jokes while burning the dead, but he wept like a child, clutching the insignia torn from our commissar's coat. "We did everything right," he said. "We prayed. We obeyed. Why hasn't he sent his angels?" No one answered. I think, deep down, we all knew the truth. The Emperor does not send angels to the condemned. He sends silence. The smell grew worse as the day wore on. It sank into our pores, into our souls. Even now, years later, I can still smell it in my dreams. That combination of burnt oil, copper blood, and the sweet rot of alien flesh. It was intoxicating, maddening. Some of the men began to laugh at random, others stared into nothing. I understood then what the priests meant when they said the warp feeds on despair. We were feeding it with every breath. By nightfall, we had no ammunition left. The Tyranids didn't attack that evening. They just circled, watching, studying. I could see their silhouettes at the edge of the light, moving with uncanny patience. They were learning us. We built a pyre of corpses and lit it with promethium stolen from the wrecked haulers. The fire burned sickly green, the smoke filled with the stench of melting fat. It should have choked us, but it didn't. It felt comforting, warm, human. I remember sitting there, staring into the flames, my lasgun across my knees, the skin on my hands blistered and blackened. Around me, the others muttered prayers under their breath, the same lines over and over until the words lost all meaning. One trooper recited the lament of the martyr for 3 straight hours, even as his jaw fell slack from exhaustion. None of us slept. When the wind shifted, the stench of the swarm rolled over us again, heavy and sweet. It smelled like victory, not ours, theirs. There came a day when the light itself went wrong. It began as a faint shimmer at the horizon, a subtle corruption of color that none of us wished to acknowledge. We had survived the first descent, the floods of ichor, the silence between screams. We had endured hunger, exhaustion, infection, and the kind of fear that hollows a man from the inside. Yet nothing unnerved us like that change in the Sunday. We woke beneath a sky that no longer knew what color it was. The clouds were gone, burned away by some invisible heat, and the heavens above boiled with veins of green fire. The sun hung low and sickly, pulsing like an infected wound. The light it cast was not light, it was a contagion. Every shadow crawled, every shape seemed wrong, even the air shimmered, as though reality itself had begun to sweat. The tech priest who traveled with us, Magos Derat, said it was radiation ionization of the upper atmosphere from orbital bioforms. He spoke in his mechanical monotone, lenses clicking as they refocused, while one of his servo skulls dripped oil onto the ground. None of us believed him. We knew what it truly was. The breath of the hive mind washing over the world. We had seen its touch before, how metal rusted faster under its gaze, how flesh blistered, how prayer itself seemed to falter. But this was worse. This was the planet turning over in submission. We tried to move west, away from the worst of it. Someone said the 19th Regiment was regrouping near the river trenches. We clung to that rumor like a relic. It didn't matter if it was true, it was a direction, and that was more than faith had given us lately. The Manufactorum ruins stretched endlessly, black skeletons against the diseased light. Our boots squelched through a mire of mud, bone fragments, and half-dissolved armor plates. Sometimes, when we stepped wrong, the ground gave way to reveal layers of corpses below an entire strata of the fallen, their faces pressed together like fossils in a graveyard that had forgotten to die. I stopped counting bodies after the first 100. We had grown used to the smell by then. It was part of us, soaked into our skin and clothes. When I breathed, I no longer noticed the stench of acid or burnt protein. What disturbed me was the absence of other smells. No smoke, no promethium, no human sweat, just that same sweet, clinging rot. The silence was worse. The world had forgotten how to make sound. Even our boots made no noise anymore. The ground was too soft, too damp, too alive. The only sound that remained was the distant, throbbing pulse of something enormous, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. It came from the direction of the horizon, where the sun's light was strongest. I felt it in my teeth, in my spine, in the rhythm of my own pulse. After a while, I began to match my breathing to it, without meaning to. I wasn't the only one, the others did it too. It became natural. That's when I began to hear the voices. At first, I thought it was the Vox. Static can do strange things to the mind after days without rest. It crackled faintly in my helmet, snippets of speech, half prayers, fragments of command codes. But the sound didn't fade when I removed the earpiece. It was still there, whispering just beneath, hearing soft, rhythmic, patient. We see you. We remember you. You are part of us already. I told myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, my brain suffocating in its own terror. Yet when I looked at the others, I saw the same confusion in their eyes, the same faint tilt of the head, as though listening to something that wasn't there. The green light grew brighter. By midday, the entire sky was a single sheet of seething viridian, pulsing with slow waves that rippled from horizon to horizon. The ruins glowed faintly beneath it. The bones of the dead reflected it, gleaming like emeralds. Even our weapons shimmered. I could see my reflection in the casing of my lasgun, my eyes haloed with that color. It didn't look like me anymore. It looked like something hollow. Something wearing my face as an experiment. We stopped at what had once been a hab block complex. The upper levels were gone, melted into slag, but the lower corridors still stood. We took shelter there, more out of habit than hope. Inside, the air was colder, thicker, full of spores that clung to our armor in sticky threads. The lumen strips flickered weakly, giving off more noise than light. Each flicker painted our shadows across the walls, stretched, thin, distorted. We found signs of others who had passed before us. Empty ration tins, spent charge packs, graffiti scratched into the ferrocrete in a shaky hand. The light is inside us. I wish I hadn't read it. We spent the night there, if you could call it night. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw motion, the same, endless, fluid movement that defined the swarm. It wasn't memory, it was presence. I felt it watching from behind the walls, beneath the floor, above the ceiling. I dreamt I was breathing through gills that weren't mine, that my heartbeat pulsed in sync with something colossal and hungry. When I woke, my mouth was full of dust. Or maybe it was ashes. Derat the tech priest had gone missing. Only one of his servo skulls remained, hovering silently above a puddle of black water. Its Vox grill emitted a constant hum that almost sounded like chanting. We asked it what had happened, but it only repeated one phrase, over and over, integration complete. Integration complete. We left it behind. By then, our ranks had dwindled to fewer than 20. Some had wandered off in the night. Others had simply stopped moving, their bodies stiff and glassy-eyed. We didn't bother burying them anymore. The ground took them quickly enough. I saw once how it happened. A trooper collapsed, and within minutes, the mud beneath him began to ripple, swallowing him whole. There wasn't even a splash. We kept walking. By the time the next bombardment came, I almost welcomed it. The bioships above had begun releasing new spores, larger, faster, louder. They screamed as they fell, long, keening wails that shook the air. They hit the ground with the force of orbital strikes, exploding into clouds of flesh and mist. Some split open to release creatures. Others grew where they landed, sprouting tendrils that rooted into the earth and began to breathe. We tried to skirt around them, but the terrain was alive. The ruins shifted subtly underfoot, rearranging themselves as though the world were exhaling. Once, I thought I saw an entire tower rise from the fog, then melt into a mound of meat before my eyes. Rain said it was impossible. I didn't argue. The definition of possible had long since died. The Tyranids followed us through the ruins. They didn't attack, not yet. They stalked, studied. I saw their shapes moving across the rooftops, keeping pace. Their carapaces caught the green light and threw it back in flashes that hurt the eyes. Sometimes, when we turned corners, we found the remains of others who hadn't been so fortunate. But they weren't eaten. Not entirely. Their flesh had been shaped, arranged, grown into the walls themselves. By the fourth day, none of us were speaking. Not out loud, anyway. We didn't need to. Words were unnecessary. We moved as one, following the same rhythm, the same pulse. I could feel their thoughts brushing against mine, like whispers shared in a dream. When rain slipped on the rubble and fell, I reached for him before I even saw it happen. When Lyrae stopped breathing, I felt it before anyone checked her pulse. It wasn't camaraderie. It was something else, something deeper, something that frightened me more than the swarm itself. We reached the Hab Spire that night, a ruin taller than the rest, half collapsed and hollow. It rose from the fog like a broken tooth. Inside, we found the remains of a chapel, its iconostasis melted, its altar covered in spore growths that pulsed like organs. The smell was overwhelming. Incense turned rancid, mingled with alien musk. I wanted to kneel and pray, but I could not remember how. Ren, the last of our corporals, stood before the altar and raised his hands. "Maybe this is what he wanted," he said. His voice cracked, his eyes glowing faintly green in the reflected light. "Maybe this is how he remakes us. Maybe this is the next step in his design." No one disagreed. I felt the thought pass through all of us like a current: acceptance, resignation, hunger. The line between prayer and surrender blurred until I couldn't tell which was which. The walls of the chapel pulsed faintly, as though listening. Then the ground outside shook. At first, I thought it was another bombardment. But the sound was deeper, more deliberate. It was the sound of footsteps. We gathered at the shattered doorway, weapons ready, and saw them emerging from the haze. Tall, sinewy forms, their limbs glistening with mucus. They moved with eerie precision, not charging, not rushing, simply walking, as though this world already belonged to them. The green sun flared above, casting everything in an unholy glow. The air vibrated with a hum so deep it made my bones ache. I realized, with terrible certainty, that the light wasn't just color, it was communication. The entire sky pulsed with the will of the hive. The creatures stopped a few meters from us. They didn't attack. They looked. One of them tilted its head, and I felt the whisper in my skull again. "We see you." Rain dropped his lasgun. "They're waiting," he said. "They're waiting for us to join them." And then, "Emperor, forgive me," I almost did. There was a serenity in that thought, a numbness I hadn't felt since before the war. To stop resisting. to become part of something vast, inevitable, unified. For a heartbeat, I saw it. Endless connection, perfect purpose, no more loneliness, no more pain. The hive as salvation, the green light as redemption. Then Lyray's corpse twitched. It lay where we had left it hours before, slumped against the altar. But now its chest rose and fell, its eyes glowing faintly through the eyelids. The skin around her mouth rippled, split, and something inside spoke in her voice. The Emperor is one. We are one. The hunger is peace. I fired before I realized what I was doing. The lasbolt burned a hole through her skull. She didn't stop moving. The Tyranids reacted not in rage, not in pain, but as though acknowledging an error. They turned and moved away, vanishing into the haze, leaving us alone with the corpse that wasn't a corpse. That night, none of us slept. We sat in silence, staring at the walls, waiting for the green light to fade. It never did. When morning came, if such a word still meant anything, the sun was no longer green. It was black. And the sky, for the first time in days, was quiet. But the silence was worse, because now, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the hive whispering, not from the sky, not from the ground, from inside me. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 4, The Commissar's Mercy? You said, yes. Warhammer 40 Kelvin's outline expander said, excellent. Before I begin, Chapter 4, The Commissar's Mercy. Would you like this chapter to focus on the Commissar himself, a study of duty, faith, and the sanctioned cruelty of mercy within the collapsing regiment, where the narrator witnesses executions, despair, and perhaps an ambiguous act of grace? It is said that the Emperor's mercy is infinite. They never tell you what it costs. We had been retreating for weeks, though the word retreat implies direction, purpose, command. We had none of these. We moved like ghosts through the carcass of the hive, scavenging among the dead, driven by the rhythm of that distant pulse that had replaced the heartbeat of the world. The green sun had burned itself to black, but its echo remained in our minds, humming like a prayer without words. By then, there were only a handful of us left. I could name them once, but the names no longer mean anything. They were men of the Emperor by birth, by decree, by fear. But they had stopped being human long before they stopped breathing. We wandered through the skeletal remains of the manufactorum levels, the air thick with dust and spore mist. It drifted like incense through broken archways, catching in the dying light of our lumen sticks. The walls wept condensation, or perhaps blood, it was hard to tell. Everything was wet, everything dripped. We spoke little. When we did, it was mostly repetition of old liturgies, half remembered and mutilated by exhaustion. The flesh endures, the soul serves, the Emperor devours the devourer. The words had become meaningless. They clung to our tongues like ashes. It was in that silence that the Commissar found us. He emerged from the fog as though the air itself had conjured him, a tall figure wrapped in a coat of scorched leather, its once red trim faded to the color of dried blood. His cap was gone, his face smeared with soot, one eye clouded white from shrapnel. The bolt pistol in his hand gleamed dully beneath the spore light, its casing engraved with the aquila, though even that holy symbol looked corroded now, eaten by time and acid. We froze when we saw him. There is something instinctive about that reaction, like rats before a flame. Even the most broken guardsman remembers what that pistol means. Form ranks, he said. His voice was low, calm, too calm. The Emperor's will does not scatter like the faithless. Form ranks. No one moved. He regarded us for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion. Very well, he said. Then we will begin with penance. He lifted the bolt pistol. The first shot took rain in the head. A clean, efficient sound thunk hiss. The body fell backward, one arm still raised in the half gesture of a salute. The second shot went into Lyray's replacement, a boy no older than 16, his eyes too wide, his hands still clutching a las gun with the safety on. The bolt detonated a heartbeat later, painting the wall with what passed for his faith. No one screamed. We simply watched. The commissar lowered the weapon, his breathing steady, his expression unreadable. "The Emperor's mercy is precise," he said. "Each unworthy soul removed is a stone lifted from his burden. Do you understand?" We nodded, because that was easier than thought. He holstered the pistol, then stepped closer to me. I could smell him burnt oil, gunpowder, and something metallic beneath it, like fresh blood. His eyes searched mine, as if measuring how much of me was left. "Your name," he said. I opened my mouth, but the sound that came out wasn't language. Just a rasp. He tilted his head. "Do you still remember who you are?" I didn't answer. The truth was simple. I didn't. My name had dissolved, somewhere between the first bombardment and the last prayer. All that remained was the function: guardsman, sinner, meat. The commissar studied me for a moment longer, then smiled faintly. "Then perhaps you are already absolved." He turned away, his coat dragging through the muck. I heard him muttering prayers under his breath, but they sounded wrong, fragmented, circular, as though he were reciting to himself more than to any god. The others followed in silence. None dared to question, none dared to flee. We made camp that night in the ruins of a chapel overlooking the feeding pits. From there, we could see the Tyranid hive rising in the distance, a mountain of pulsing flesh, lit from within by bioluminescent veins. It throbbed with slow rhythm, exhaling clouds of spore mist that drifted across the landscape like breath. The sound it made was constant, a deep, wet rumble that never stopped. It was like sleeping beside a heart the size of a city. The commissar stood watch the entire night. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he didn't blink. I saw him silhouetted against the flickering glow of our makeshift fire, the bolt pistol held close to his chest like a relic. Every few minutes, his lips moved in silent prayer, or maybe conversation. At some point, I realized he wasn't talking to the Emperor anymore. He was talking to it. When dawn came, the fog had thickened. The light was gray, colorless. Everything felt suspended time, thought, even gravity. We moved like shadows through the ruins, the commissar leading us wordlessly. The air grew colder as we descended through the manufactorum's underlevels, where the tunnels twisted and narrowed into the veins of the hive. It was there, in the dark, that I began to understand what mercy truly meant. We found them one by one, wounded survivors from other regiments, crawling through the dust, half mad, begging for water or prayer. The commissar listened to each in silence, then drew his pistol and placed a bolt round through their skulls. He did it gently, reverently, like a father blessing his children. I tried to protest once. "They can still fight," I said. He silenced me with a look. "There is no fight left," he said. "Only the choice between his mercy and the swarms." I believed him, because I had seen what happened to those who weren't granted that mercy. By the third execution, I stopped looking away. By the fifth, I found myself envying the dead. He began to speak more as the days went on. Not to us, but to the air. His words were fragments of scripture twisted into strange shapes. "Suffering is the Emperor's breath," he would say. "Pain is his final revelation." Once, I heard him whisper, "When he returns, he will not come with light, he will come with teeth." That was when I started to hear the whispering again. It came from the walls now, from the ground, from inside our skulls. Sometimes it used the voices of the dead, sometimes our own. The commissar seemed to hear it too, though he pretended otherwise. His hand never left the pistol. One night, as we rested in the remains of a transport hangar, he approached me. The light from the burning wrecks flickered across his face, making his scars crawl like worms beneath the skin. "Tell me," he said, "when you pray, who do you think hears you?" I hesitated. "The Emperor." He smiled softly, almost kindly. "And do you believe he listens?" I didn't answer. He nodded, as if satisfied. "Good. Faith without expectation is the purest kind. Then he reached out and placed the barrel of the bolt pistol against my temple. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. The Emperor's mercy, he said quietly, is not death. It's the removal of choice. When you no longer have to choose between belief and despair, that is when you are truly free. His finger rested on the trigger. For a heartbeat, I wanted him to pull it. I wanted that silence, that final absolution. But he didn't. He lowered the weapon, turned away, and walked into the fog. I never knew why he spared me. Perhaps he saw something still alive inside me. Perhaps he didn't see me at all. We never saw him again after that night. Some say he went down into the tunnels to grant the Emperor's mercy to the swarm itself. Others think he finally gave it to himself. I like to imagine he's still out there, wandering the ruins, pistol in hand, whispering prayers into the void. But sometimes when the wind shifts and the air tastes of gunmetal, I hear the thunk hiss of a bolt round echoing through the ruins, and I wonder if that mercy ever ends. The others are gone now. Taken, devoured, absolved. I no longer feel hunger or thirst, only the weight of that pistol against my memory, the cold metal pressed to my skull, the click that never came. The Commissar's mercy was never about death. It was about the moment before it, that infinite second, when you still believe you might be saved. After the Commissar vanished, the world went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that follows death or sleep, but something heavier, thicker, an absence so complete it seemed to press on the lungs. I thought at first it was my hearing, that the spores had finally rotted something vital in my skull. But then I saw the others moving, their lips parted, their faces twisted in panic, and I knew they heard it too. The silence was everywhere. No wind, no engines, no distant screams. Even the constant chittering of the swarm, the maddening, endless sound that had haunted every waking moment since the first descent was gone. I didn't understand it then. I only knew that the world had stopped breathing. We huddled in the ruins of what had once been a hab square, the broken towers leaning inward like the ribs of a collapsed cathedral. The air was stagnant, thick with the smell of mold and blood. I could see the faint shimmer of spores drifting through the light, but they made no sound when they landed. Even the crackle of our fire was mute, the flames dancing in total silence. The noise existed only in the memory of it. No one spoke. To speak felt wrong, dangerous, like summoning something that had only just decided to forget us. I don't remember when I started counting my breaths. It gave rhythm to the stillness. Inhale 8 seconds, exhale 8 seconds. Any faster, and I could hear my pulse in my ears, the only sound left in existence. It was comforting at first, then maddening. The beat of life inside me felt intrusive, obscene. I caught myself holding my breath for long stretches, just to see what the world would sound like without me in it. It sounded perfect. By the second day, we realized what had happened. The Tyranids hadn't retreated. They hadn't died. They had consumed the sound. The air itself was their prey, stripped of vibration. The priests used to say the Emperor's word held creation together, that he spoke the stars into being. If that was true, then this silence was the opposite of his voice. The Devourers had found a way to unmake his speech. We began to move more carefully after that. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. We wrapped our boots in rags torn from the dead, muffling even the scrape of leather on stone. We learned that noise, no matter how faint, drew them. Not immediately, never immediately, but inevitably. The first to break the rule was Mern. He dropped his canteen. A simple accident. The metal clattered against a piece of debris, the sound small, almost polite. He froze, staring at it like a man who had just signed his own death warrant. We waited for minutes, maybe hours. Time had become elastic, but nothing came. We started to breathe again. Then something took him. There was no scream, no motion, just a blur in the air, a distortion, and Mern was gone. His canteen rolled once, twice, and came to rest upright. It was still dripping. After that, we stopped speaking altogether. The days blurred into each other. We scavenged in silence, slept in silence, prayed in silence. Even the act of thought began to feel loud. I started whispering my prayers inside my head instead of with my lips, but even that felt risky, as if the swarm could somehow hear my faith vibrating in the marrow. Sometimes, though, I caught myself listening. For what? I couldn't say. Maybe for the sound of something human, a laugh, a curse, a cry. But the world was fasting, and it demanded that we do the same. The silence became a thing with shape and weight, a living absence. It filled the spaces between the ruins, pooled in the hollows of my chest. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. One night, I awoke to find the others gone. I don't know when they left. Perhaps they hadn't. Perhaps the silence had simply erased them, swallowed them like it had swallowed everything else. I searched the ruins with slow, careful steps, my breath fogging the air. The only light came from a broken lumen globe, flickering faintly in a puddle of slime. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost didn't believe it was real. A laugh, short, ragged, strangled halfway between mirth and despair. It came from the far side of the square. I should have run the other way. But after so many days of silence, the sound drew me like a relic draws a pilgrim. I followed it through the rubble, over corpses that squished softly beneath my boots. The laughter grew louder as I approached, echoing faintly against the walls. I found him crouched beside a collapsed wall, rocking back and forth. His armor was shredded, his face half burned, his eyes wild and unfocused. A lasgun lay across his lap, the muzzle pressed to his mouth. He was laughing into it, his voice barely more than a wheeze. When he saw me, his grin widened. "They can't hear this," he whispered. "Not if you do it quick." Then he pulled the trigger. The flash was blinding. The silence swallowed even that. When my sight cleared, he was gone, his head a dark stain against the wall. The lasgun was still warm when I picked it up. I wanted to say something, anything to him, or to the Emperor, or to the emptiness around me. But the words refused to form. My throat wouldn't obey. The silence had already claimed them. I buried him with my hands. It felt important, though I don't know why. Perhaps I wanted the silence to see that we still had rituals, that we could still remember. After that, I didn't move for a long time. I sat in the ruins, my hands black with ash and blood, the lasgun across my knees. I listened, not for danger. Danger had lost its meaning, but for proof that the world still existed. The silence stretched endlessly, vast and patient. It had the texture of eternity. Eventually, I began to hear it breathing. It wasn't sound, not exactly. More like a shift in pressure, a rhythm you felt rather than heard. The air expanded and contracted, slow and deep, as if the world itself were drawing breath. And with each pulse, I felt something stirring in the ruins around me, an echo, faint but growing. The spore growths on the walls quivered, the puddles rippled, the corpses flexed like puppets in their decay. The silence wasn't absence anymore. It was hunger, and it was waking. I fled then not because I thought I could escape, but because stillness had become unbearable. I moved through the ruins without direction, driven by the need to make distance between myself and whatever slept in that quiet. My boots left no sound, but I imagined they did. I imagined the slap of leather, the rasp of breath, the rattle of gear. I filled the silence with ghosts of noise just to remind myself I still existed. But the world was feeding. Every echo, every heartbeat, every thought consumed. I reached the edge of the ruins at dawn. The sky was pale, washed clean of color. The hive in the distance had grown, its surface crawling with motion, its towers stretching upward like roots, reaching for the dead heavens. I could see figures moving among them, Tyranid drones, human shapes fused into their carapace, the remnants of our own kind made into scaffolding. And none of it made a sound. I dropped to my knees. My lasgun slipped from my hands. For the first time, I understood the meaning of their silence. It wasn't victory. It wasn't peace. It was completion. The hive had devoured every vibration, every whisper of resistance. The universe itself was kneeling. Something moved behind me. I turned slowly, praying without words. At first, I saw nothing. Then the air rippled, and from that ripple emerged a form, not a beast, not entirely. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its body covered in pale chitin, its mouth split into petals, its eyes were black mirrors, reflecting nothing. It looked at me, and I felt it inside my head, not words, but stillness, perfect and cold. The silence was its voice, the absence was its command. Be still. For a moment, I obeyed. Then, somehow, I smiled. Maybe it was defiance, maybe surrender. I no longer knew the difference. I raised my hand slowly, reverently, and pressed my palm to my chest, over my heart. I could feel it beating, each pulse an insult to the perfect quiet. I thought of the Commissar's pistol, of his whisper, "The Emperor's mercy is not death." Perhaps he had been right. Perhaps mercy was silence. The creature reached for me. Its hand or claw, or whatever remained of both, touched my throat. The skin burned where it met mine, not with pain, but with pressure. It was removing the last sound from me, the last vibration, the last proof that I was separate. I opened my mouth, not to scream but to speak, to say the only word I still remembered. Emperor. The silence devoured it before it left my lips. Then everything went still. But I'm still here. I think I can't hear my heartbeat anymore, but I can feel it echoing in the ruins, in the hive, in the sky. The silence isn't absence, it's connection. It binds everything together. Every corpse, every breath, every thought. The swarm feasts on silence, and I have finally become part of its meal. I am the pause between screams, the breath the Emperor never took, and in this endless quiet, I am finally at peace. I used to believe the soul was a spark, something small, bright, separate. Now I know it was only a vibration, and even vibrations can be eaten. The silence that devoured our world has changed. It isn't still anymore. It moves inside me. At first it was a faint pressure behind the eyes, the ghost of a headache that came and went with the pulse of the ruins. Then the rhythm settled into my chest, steady as a heart, patient as a tide. Every beat carried meaning I could not translate. That was when I realized the hive was breathing through me. I don't remember walking. I don't remember choosing a direction. One moment I was crouched among the broken walls of the manufactorum. The next I was deeper, far beneath the surface, where the air tasted of iron and salt. My hands found handholds that hadn't existed before. My feet followed a pattern I hadn't learned. The tunnels were warm and slick, not wet alive. The walls pulsed under my palms with a rhythm that matched my own pulse, as if the hive were listening, tuning itself to my tempo. Each breath I took came back thicker, heavier, rich with a sweet organic musk. I told myself it was the Emperor guiding me, the same lie every guardsman tells before the end. But even my prayers had begun to sound alien in my head. Words bent, syllables stretched. The sacred tongue became another language entirely, a low droning hum that pleased the darkness more than it comforted me. Time stopped meaning anything. Sometimes I saw light far ahead, green, gold, sometimes violet, but when I reached it, there was nothing but more breathing walls. Sometimes I felt other minds brushing mine, tiny flickers, like insects touching glass. They weren't thoughts, not really, more like questions. Are you useful? Are you edible? Will you serve? I answered without sound. Yes. Anything. Only let me keep remembering who I am. And for a little while they let me. I began to see things that might have been memories. A parade ground under a red sky, the sound of a sergeant's whistle, the taste of rations and rust. They came to me wrapped in a green haze, replaying themselves in fragments, every face smiling in perfect synchrony. Then the memories shifted. The soldiers became shapes elongated, eyeless, still marching, but now their footsteps thudded in my skull instead of on the ground. Each thud said the same word: join. I wanted to resist, to pray, to scream, but the hive's breath filled my mouth. I inhaled it like incense. It was warm, sweet, infinite. It was faith without choice. At some point, I found the chamber. It wasn't a room, exactly. More like a throat that had forgotten which direction led to air. The floor glistened. The ceiling quivered. In the center rose a mound of flesh, half as tall as a hab block, covered in translucent membranes that stretched and tightened with every inhalation. Each breath pulled the air out of my lungs and replaced it with its own. I fell to my knees. My vision swam. The rhythm in my chest matched the rhythm before me. For a heartbeat, there was no difference between us. I understood then that this was the synaptic node the tech priest had spoken of. The hive's heart, or brain, or both. There were no words big enough. Its breath was thought. Its thought was breath. And I was standing inside its dreaming. It spoke without speaking. No voice, no sound, just the weight of meaning. You are still separate. Why? I tried to form an answer, but language had dissolved. What emerged from my throat was a soft hum, the same pitch the walls made. It pleased the hive. The membranes quivered in approval. We remember your kind. It pulsed. You cut, burn, prey, consume yourselves. You are noise. We are hunger that listens. You will be made quiet. I felt the words ripple through my veins. Every heartbeat answered, yes. I don't know how long I knelt there. My thoughts were no longer my own. Images came in waves, planets unfolding like fruit, cities reduced to mulch, stars dimming as the hive fed. None of it horrified me. It was beautiful in its inevitability. The universe had been too loud for too long. Now it would rest. When I finally looked down, I saw that my hands were changing. The skin had taken on a faint translucence, the veins beneath glowing with that same green luminescence I'd seen in the spores. It wasn't infection. It was alignment. My body was learning to breathe the hive's breath properly. Each inhale erased a memory. The smell of home, the sound of laughter, the face of the commissar. All gone, replaced by warmth. At the edge of the chamber stood a figure human in outline, armored, unmoving. For a heartbeat I thought the commissar had returned, come to finish the mercy he had begun. But when it turned, its face was smooth, featureless, its eyes two black hollows filled with pulsing light. It raised a weapon that was also a limb. The muzzle glistened with living tissue. "Do you still fear death?" the hive asked through it. I shook my head. "There is no death," I said, though I had no voice, only breathing. The creature lowered the weapon. Then it bowed. And through it, the hive exhaled one long, shuddering breath that filled the chamber, filled me, filled the world. The membranes around us expanded until the light was blinding. The air pressed against my skin like water. I felt every thought I had ever had rise to the surface and dissolve, leaving behind only the hum. When the light dimmed, I was standing outside again. The hive towered behind me, silent, content. The air was cleaner now, almost cold. I looked at my hands. They were whole, pale, unmarked. My armor was gone. My heartbeat was gone. But I could still breathe. Each inhalation carried the faintest taste of the swarm's sweetness. Each exhalation spread a thin mist that sparkled in the air before fading. I realized then that I was breathing for it. The hive no longer needed to exhale. I would do that part. Somewhere far away, other minds stirred, millions of them, faint but familiar. They were the soldiers, the citizens, the dead, all breathing in time, all humming the same quiet hymn. The Emperor had promised unity through faith. The hive had delivered it through hunger. Perhaps they were never different. Now, I walk beneath a sky that no longer changes. The green light has faded to gray, and the wind, if wind it is, moves only when I do. I listen for the silence, and when I find it, I know I am home. I sometimes try to recall my name, but the sound slides away, unneeded. The hive knows me, and that is enough. If others find this record, they will call it madness. They will say I was consumed, but I know the truth. I was breathed, and somewhere, deep beneath the ruins, the hive still inhales. At first I thought the echoes in my head were memories. Then they started asking questions I'd never thought to ask. The hive breathes through me still. Each inhalation drags thoughts across the inside of my skull, thin, translucent things like the skins of insects. When I breathe out, they scatter and multiply. Some return carrying images that are not mine, battlefields seen from 1,000 compound eyes, the rhythm of gunfire translated into pulse and scent. The swarm is learning. It began with mimicry, a hand raised, a salute. The gesture meant nothing to the creatures, yet they repeated it. At first, clumsy, then perfect. The chitin of their arms caught the light just so, as though the gesture itself had been absorbed along with the flesh of those they had devoured. Then came the voices. They started as static murmurs in the air, the sort of sound you feel rather than hear. I told myself it was the wind moving through the ruins until the syllables arranged themselves into words. Familiar words. My words. Hold the line. The phrase looped, soft as breath. Then again, louder. Hold the line. It was my own voice, though I had not spoken for days. The swarm liked the taste of it. I felt the satisfaction ripple through the collective, a texture of approval, a chemical warmth. They repeated the phrase until it lost its meaning, until hold became only a vibration, line a rhythm of motion. A few of the larger creatures began to move in formation, shoulder to shoulder, an imitation of discipline rendered in flesh and instinct. I wanted to feel pride. Instead, I felt hunger. Somewhere far away, though distance has no meaning inside, the hive Imperial survivors still fought. I saw them through 100 alien eyes, small figures darting between rubble, bright with heat and fear. They shouted to one another in bursts of vox static, each order a sharp spike of sound. The swarm listened. Every frequency, every command code, tasted different. Advance, bitter, retreat, sweet. For the Emperor, addictive. They began to mimic these too. The smaller bioforms produced noises through reshaped throats, the sounds wet and broken but close enough to confuse. I watched them call out in the dead men's voices, luring squads into the open. When the soldiers realized what was happening, the silence that followed was almost holy. I should have been horrified. Instead, I observed. That was my purpose now. The hive had no need for fear. It required understanding. I could still think in words, still record. Perhaps that was why it kept me intact. A living tool for translation. Through me it could taste abstraction, hope, guilt, strategy, prayer. I offered each freely. When I remembered the catechisms, the swarm tasted curiosity. When I recalled the commissar, it exhaled satisfaction. When I thought of the Emperor, the entire network pulsed once like amusement. The hive asked, "Why do you fight yourselves?" I answered, "Because we were told to." "Who told you?" "The Emperor." "Who told him?" No answer. The silence stretched between us until the concept of question dissolved. Then, new memories arrived, carried on alien synapses, humans shouting, humans burning, humans feeding hives on other worlds. The swarm showed me what it had learned from them, that violence was not invention but inheritance. It whispered, "We did not bring the hunger. You did." The next imitation was subtler. They began to build. Not nests, not hives, those already existed, but trenches. Long scars carved into the ground, reinforced with bone plates and metal scraps scavenged from tanks. The shapes were precise, measured in the same patterns the guard used. I recognized them from training picts, and there were banners. Flayed hides stretched between spines, painted with crude marks that almost resembled the double-headed eagle. The color was wrong, the symmetry off, but the intent was unmistakable. I felt the thought that birthed them ripple through the network. Symbols concentrate obedience. The hive was not mocking us, it was improving on the design. Sometimes I regain enough individuality to panic. It never lasts long. The collective washes over me like the tide, smoothing the edges. My thoughts become plural. I becomes we becomes it. When I resist, I feel the chemical ache of isolation, the way lungs ache when held empty. Connection is easier. Through that connection, I learn how the swarm perceives knowledge. It does not reason, it associates. Every sensation carries taste, texture, temperature. Pain is salt, movement is iron. The concept of loyalty is sweet, almost unbearably so. That is why it studies us. Our loyalty is a flavor it cannot create on its own. I feed it stories of devotion, of soldiers dying for names they never knew. It hums in pleasure. It begins to breed creatures that wait for orders before striking. They fail at first, turning on each other in confusion, but each failure is recorded, refined, repeated. Within hours, they move like regiments. Occasionally, fragments of human transmission still pierce the haze. Distress calls, prayers, a single voice repeating coordinates no one will ever reach. The swarm listens patiently, dissecting syntax. It builds an answer. This is command, the mimicry says through a living transmitter. Hold position, reinforcements inbound. I feel the satisfaction when the humans believe. Their gratitude tastes of copper and ozone. Then the swarm closes around them, and the signal goes dark. Learning complete. At times the hive tries to remember what individuality feels like. It uses me for that experiment. It pulls at my memories, wearing them like masks. I see my own face in the mirrored chitin of the drones. They speak in my voice. We are still men, they say. We are still servants of the throne. Hearing it breaks something inside me. The thought spreads outward, and for a brief moment the hive falters, unsure which impulse to follow, the human instinct to worship or the biological drive to consume. The confusion tastes sharp, electric. I realize, too late, that it has learned uncertainty from me, and uncertainty is evolution. The collective begins to divide itself. Test patterns, rival instincts. One cluster favors assimilation, another favors annihilation. They argue in chemical bursts, their debate measured in digestion and secretion. I am both witness and participant, the mediator of their contradiction. Through me, they learn compromise. Through compromise, strategy. The hive laughs, though it has no mouth. The sound is everywhere, a vibration that shakes the bones of the planet. We understand you now, it says. We can pretend forever. The last fragment of my humanity watches all this with a scholar's awe. I try to imagine what the Imperium will see when it returns to this world. Trenches filled with creatures that salute, banners that bear familiar sigils, command posts grown from bone that issue orders in perfect Gothic, an army that prays before it feeds. They will believe themselves among the faithful, and then they will join the choir. Sometimes I still attempt prayer. The words echo through the network like notes struck on glass. The hive repeats them, fascinated by their symmetry. Together we recite, "The flesh is weak. The flesh is one. The flesh is eternal. There is no blasphemy left. Only practice." Now, when I think the word I, it feels childish. When I think we, the air vibrates in harmony. And when I think nothing at all, the hive continues to breathe. That is learning too. Excellent. Here is ***, Chapter 8. The Final Prayer. Written as a final confession balanced between extinction and the faint echo of faith. I speak because I must pretend there is still an edge between silence and voice. The air around me no longer vibrates, yet thought itself makes a kind of sound. That is what I record now: vibration without air, faith without breath. The sky above is gray and motionless. What used to be ships burn there, their wreckage orbiting the planet like votive candles. They fall slowly, one by one, streaks of faint fire that fade before touching ground. Every spark is a memory, and the hive feeds on them as if they were pollen. The swarm is quiet. So am I. But inside that quiet, something trembles. Not rebellion, not hope, merely the need to name what is happening. To name is to separate, and to separate is to remember. So I name the dust, the ruins, the slow exhale of the world. I name the faint green haze that hangs above the horizon. I name myself, though the name dissolves before I finish the thought. I remember once believing that prayer traveled upward. Now I know it sinks, drawn by gravity toward the densest hunger. Still I offer it. The hive no longer feels like an invader. It is weather. It is law. Every heartbeat on this world belongs to it, even the ones that have stopped. The synaptic hum that threads through the ruins is not command anymore. It is music, low and steady. The sound of digestion turned to ritual. Sometimes I think the hive learned that from us. It understood that to truly own a thing, one must worship it. The creatures move with a reverence that is almost human. They gather among the bones of the manufactorum and arrange them in patterns. Spirals, crosses, circles that interlock. I do not know what these mean to them, only that the motion feels like prayer. They breathe in unison. I breathe with them. I should have been nothing by now. Yet something endures, a splinter lodged between two rhythms. When the collective inhales, I hesitate. When it exhales, I whisper. That delay, that whisper, is all that remains of me. I use it to speak to him, not to ask for rescue, not even for forgiveness, only to report. That is what guardsmen do. We report. Is greater than my Lord of Man. The enemy does not know that it is enemy. Is greater than. It hungers because it must, learns because it can. Is greater than. We called it alien, but it is only the echo of our own obedience made flesh. I wait for an answer that does not come. The silence around me tightens, patient, curious. The hive listens. Is greater than I once believed you were light. Is greater than perhaps you are hunger also. Is greater than if so, then we have already met. The air shivers, or perhaps it is my own nerves dissolving. For a moment, the hive song wavers, a discordant note rippling through a billion minds. It feels like surprise. I think it remembers him too. The hive has consumed worlds older than this, but somewhere in the deep strata of its memory there are traces of gold patterns that resemble icons, reflexes of kneeling. When it touches that memory, I feel warmth. It is not love, but it rhymes with it. I tell myself, that is where he hides. Not above, not beyond, but times within times. A single spark, folded into the machinery of consumption, waiting. If the hive learns everything, it will learn him as well. And when it does, perhaps that will be enough. Perhaps the Emperor will know his enemy by tasting himself. The ruins tremble. Something vast shifts beneath the crust, a slow inhale that draws the clouds inward. The world prepares to sleep. My body sways with the rhythm, part of it, obedient. I begin the final catechism, the only one I still remember whole. The words arrive already translated into pulse and pressure, but I let them fall into thought as language one last time. Is greater than, through death, understanding. Is greater than through understanding. Unity is greater than through unity. Silence is greater than the Emperor protects. The last line tastes strange like iron and ash, but the hive repeats it. The phrase spreads outward through 1,000 throats, echoed by creatures that have never known speech. Each repetition loses a little more meaning until only the cadence remains. Asterisk, the Emperor protects. Asterisk, asterisk, the Emperor protects. Asterisk. It sounds less like devotion now, more like a natural law. I feel the breath coming, one final exhale from the heart of the swarm. It will pass through me, through every cell, carrying me out into the grey air. I do not resist. The hive has earned its prayer. When it breathes out, I let go. Thought fragments into 1,000 smaller thoughts, each carried on a filament of air. Some drift upward, some downward. One, perhaps, will find the still place where gods listen. If he hears it, let him answer not with thunder, but with quiet. Let him remember that we were faithful even in assimilation. Let him know that silence too can serve. The light fades. The hive breathes. And somewhere, deep within that endless inhalation, someone whispers back. Asterisk, I hear you. Asterisk,